Hello and welcome to this video where we will discuss the issue of forest fires in France, the situation of our water bomber planes, what we have available, what we should have done, and what we need to do now that the shortage has been identified. First, we need to review our fleet status. So, France has about a dozen Canadair planes, the CL-415s, which are large water bomber aircraft. These are what we call amphibious planes, meaning they can scoop up water before dropping tons of it, which, with the blast effect, helps put out the fire. The second category is what we call the Dash 8S, and we have 8 of those. These are aircraft that land on the ground at specially equipped airports, which we call pelicandromes. We have 27 pelicandromes spread across the entire country, which allows for relatively quick rotations. And since they always land on the ground, they are particularly used to drop retardant. That's the red liquid we always see, which helps slow down the fire. And along with these aircraft, we have Beechcrafts. There are 3 of them, which are our coordination and observation planes, which generally helps improve the fleet's efficiency. The problem is that this fleet may seem relatively large, but on one hand, the needs are increasing every year, and on top of that, its availability isn't necessarily up to par. For example, on July 1st, 2025, there were only 9 Canadairs and 6 Dash available. And this year, there aren't any official statistics, but a Canadair pilot revealed that only 5 Canadairs were actually available for the fires we're currently experiencing. So it's an improvement compared to before. Let me remind you that I left civil security in 2017. And in the years that followed, there were some days when only 2 aircraft were able to scoop water. So when we got back to 5, 8, 9, 10, obviously it's an improvement. It's still below the availability target, which is 98%. That's just theory because the Canadair fleet in France is on average 27.5 years old. And that's the case everywhere in the world since these planes stopped being built several decades ago and there is absolutely no solution. So for 2026, the government has also leased aircraft, especially air tractors, which are small planes mainly used for agricultural spraying and can carry more than a ton of water. Now they're being widely used by many countries for firefighting. Then there are 4 light helicopters equipped with what's called a Bambi bucket, which means they can carry about a ton of water underneath on a kind of sling that allows for relatively quick trips between the fire zone and the places where they can scoop up water, including swimming pools, which really increases the number of available water sources. 6 heavy helicopters have been rented, which significantly impacts operations due to their high turnaround rate. And in the example you see on the screen with this helicopter, it's a Super Puma that, on July 25th, was able to make 17 drops of 4 tons of water in just 1 hour and 20 minutes. So, obviously, it doesn't have the same immediate impact you might expect when you have the Canadair or the water bomber planes that drop it directly on the fire. But nevertheless, that's dozens and dozens of tons of water, so it's very important. It really has an impact. There are also the Departmental Fire and Rescue Services, known as the SDIS, which can also rent aircraft, helicopters. And right now, obviously, the need is huge all over Europe, so the prices are very, very high. But nevertheless, there are still rentals happening. And so there is also additional support from private companies, which provide these water bomber planes or water bomber helicopters on a very occasional basis. So let's be clear, there are resources available and efforts have been made. Availability is better now than it was a few years ago. There have been rentals. But there are still controversies that are simply based on absolutely nothing concrete. Because there were things we could have done, and there are accusations that are simply wrong. So what could we have done? First, you saw that for the first time we used the A400M as a water bomber. So it's a kit that has been developed for several years, with the first patents dating back to 2015, so we could have moved much faster on this project. And today there is only one prototype that belongs to Airbus as part of the development, which is available. And so this prototype, it was used in France as a water bomber. Let me remind you, the A400M can theoretically carry over 30 tons of payload, but here we put a kit on it that can be installed very quickly in just a few dozen minutes, and it can carry 20 tons of retardant. Simply, the A400M can't land on all the air tanker bases. It has to go back, either to Istras in this case. Here, that means a round trip will take more than 3 hours. So the turnaround is relatively slow. But obviously, if one day we're better organized, if there's preparation, we can imagine that there could be rotations that are much more intense and much faster. But for this year, we hadn't placed an order, so there's only one kit available. It's the prototype kit. And now, if we really want to have more, we have to place an order right away, except that the production lead time means delivery would come 18 months later. That would be in early 2028, which is fairly late compared to the other projects I'll mention next. Another issue is the availability of planes in the Air Force. The Air Force doesn't have enough A400Ms, so they would need more A400Ms in order to have a few that would be dedicated and kept on the ground to be ready in case of a fire. So you still need to have more of them, you need to train the pilots, you need to have more air tanker bases to be more efficient, to do shorter rotations, instead of always going to Istras or airports reserved for the A400M. And then you need to know who pays. Is it civil protection that's going to pay? Or is it the Air Force? And at that point, the budget has to keep up to meet those increased needs. But in any case, obviously it's interesting and it's a project that shouldn't be overlooked. We could have implemented another system called Kylem as early as this year. Kylem, what is it? They're a kind of large canisters that fit in boxes that weigh a ton in which we put water or retardant. And actually, it can be dropped from any military plane capable of opening its rear cargo bay. And it's very interesting because it can be deployed very quickly without any modifications needed on the planes. They don't get sprayed, so there's no corrosion or anything like that. And there are many countries implementing this solution. For example, in South America, you have Peru, you have Chile. In Europe, for example, we can mention Romania, which has been using it extensively for years, or again, Israel, which also uses it extensively. And in principle, this could even still be deployed this year, but to my knowledge, no contact has been made. And in any case, I think we can really at least run a trial over the next few years and try to implement it. And the last option would be to rent more helicopters or small planes, adapted crop dusting aircraft. But let's be clear, even if we had done all that, given the scale of the fires this year, it wouldn't have dramatically changed the situation, because overall, structurally, we lack water-bombing aircraft and there are no other large-scale solutions. And now that brings me to these accusations that I find unfair against civil security, against the state, against national resources. First, it's about buying foreign planes. For example, the Beriev 200 was tested in Italy, Portugal, Greece, and Israel. No one wanted it. Quite simply because it has low accuracy in its drops, its fuel consumption is excessive. In fact, it hasn't even been certified outside of Russia. And in any case, if we had bought this plane, well, its maintenance is already a disaster. But on top of that, the engines are Ukrainian, so there are no spare parts available right now. And the countries that bought it, like Algeria and Azerbaijan, don't have enough spare parts. It's an aircraft they've completely forgotten about. Next, in China, you have the AG-600. As for that one, there are only a few units which are operated only within the country. It's not certified outside of China, and it's not even offered for export. So for now, it really looks more like Chinese publicity than a real solution. And the last option is the Japanese Shinmaiwa. Now, that's simply a seaplane dedicated to search and rescue at sea. It was produced in only 9 units starting about 20 years ago. No aircraft is certified for firefighting, and no operational test campaign has taken place, so these foreign solutions should simply be forgotten. Stop talking about them. They don't exist. So there is a Canadian solution left to replace the Canadair, which exists today. It's the DHC-515 because it was bought by de Havilland Canada. Now it's called the DHC-515. And now the question is about setting up the industrial production line, because you should know that this aircraft stopped being produced more than 20 years ago. And to restart the production line, obviously orders are needed from all over the world, but the supply chain also needs to be restarted and the production line needs to be relaunched. And what the Canadians want, because they know very well that there might be 400 planes that could be sold, is for this to be a dual line to produce Canadairs and also to restart the production of the Q400. That means if this is financed by the European Union, we are buying Canadian planes. We are going to create a competitor to ATR, the world's leading turboprop aircraft manufacturer, ATR. So if we buy Canadian, we are subsidizing the destruction of jobs in a French civil aircraft manufacturer. And obviously, we also prevent ourselves from being able to develop the national industry because there are national solutions that I will talk to you about right after. But in any case, we are waiting for 2 other planes in 2028. But objectively, the timeline is not very credible because industrially, the Canadians are not ready. And then there are 2 other units expected in 2032 and 2033, except that by that time we will have national solutions, including for amphibious planes, and so logically it makes more sense to switch to other types of aircraft. So what can we expect now? What decisions need to be made quickly? The first is to sign multi-year contracts with the small AT-802S and helicopters to avoid having to rent them temporarily. That gives us visibility on the actual capacity. It allows us to smooth out the prices. We know how much we're going to pay, so we have clear budgets and an expected level of efficiency. The second is to order at least 2 A400M kits to be able to turn them into water bombers, provided once again that the Air Force also has the necessary number of planes. The third solution, really, I think all of this adds up, is to go with Kai-Lim. To be able to put it, for example, on Hercules C-130 on CASA, on A400M to be able to secure it like that. Dozens and dozens of tons of these retardant containers that have proven themselves in several countries, including in terms of price in Europe. And above all, we need to act right away to place an order for the 2 national projects that are supported both by the National Federation of Firefighters and by the Entente Valable. The Entente Valable is the organization that will approve civil security equipment in the same way that the Directorate of Armaments, the DGA, approves military equipment. The first one, you know it because I'm involved with them, so I really believe in it. And have for years and years. It's called Kepler 72. The goal is you take an ATR, a regional transport aircraft, and you convert it into a water bomber. The project is progressing well. Please see the video I made recently with the founder. But in addition, since then, 10 kits have been directly ordered by Corsica Technic, and we now know that the company Lasia will provide an ATR-72 so that it can be converted. This will really allow the certification of the aircraft to be validated as early as next year, so that the plane will be operational for the 2028 fire season. A fundraising campaign is underway to finish this project, with many firefighters participating and urging others to join. I'll put the link in the comments of this video if you also want to take concrete action to support a real French industrial project that will be completed, and one that is truly awaited by firefighters in the field. The second project that checks all these boxes is the one called Inero. Inero is a real amphibious water bomber aircraft, which has partnerships with Airbus, that's pretty impressive, and with Onera, which is also quite something, and has already managed to raise over 100 million euros, so it's really a very serious project, knowing that to fully develop the aircraft, including certification and industrialization, it requires 1 billion euros. So we're still at the beginning. And today, what's important is to move on to actually making a purchase, because if you go ahead and make a purchase, logically, well, you stop having trouble raising funds. Your project will move forward at the planned pace. And you actually have Kepler 72s, converted ATR 72s, which will be available as early as 2028, and you really have the Inero, which will be available in 2032-2033. So exactly at the same time, we're expecting the Canadair, which, on top of that, will be from a previous generation. Here, we're really talking about a completely new aircraft. The Canadair is an aircraft that's been improved with a new modernization suite, and so on, but we're really not on the same level of technical sophistication. Then there are other projects at different stages of development. For example, there's the issue of drones. I'm convinced that one day we'll have drones to complement helicopters and so on. And there's a startup called Daedalus that's planning a drone that will carry 1 ton or 1,200 liters of water and can be deployed. There's a fundraising round underway. So, maybe its first flight for the prototype could happen within 2 years. So we still have to wait a little bit. Then there's Positive Aviation, which you've already seen on the channel. I've talked about it on the channel. It's a company that also wants to convert ATR-72s, but not to make planes that land at refill bases, but to make planes that scoop up water, and for that, it requires adding floats. So it's really a very, very big technical challenge. But if the technical feasibility is demonstrated, it could be an excellent solution for an amphibious plane. Even faster than the Inero, since it would be available as early as 2029 and at a lower price, since here we're talking about adapting an ATR-72, rather than starting over with a completely new aircraft with new production lines, dedicated maintenance, and so on. Then there are other water bomber projects at the European level. There is one in Belgium, there is one in Italy, but these are much earlier stage projects, even less funded, much less concrete, with deadlines that are even further away, so these are not solutions. In short, as you can see, we're not lacking ideas. There are a lot of possibilities. We definitely missed the boat 5 or 10 years ago when we could have placed orders for these different systems. There are ideas like converting old planes at the end of their life, using Airbus A320s and Boeing 747s. Occasionally, it's very good, it's very effective, it provides support, but if you don't do it on a large-scale assembly line style and it's just samples like 3 planes, here and there in the end, you don't get any economies of scale, you don't have overall efficiency. And then jet planes, sure, it's good to have an A320, it will help occasionally, But in reality, the hourly cost is still very high compared to what it's used for as a water bomber. I'm not even mentioning all the topics around artificial intelligence, satellites, and so on. I know there are plenty of other projects. I get a lot of emails, a lot of messages about all that. And I also want to emphasize something. Here we're talking about the planes, the aviation side. Obviously, they're not the only ones, but especially the guys on the ground. They're the ones who put out the fires. They complement each other. You don't put out a fire with just water bombers. It's still the people on the ground who work, who suffer, who die, and they absolutely need our support too. We have to. By the way, you can also get involved with the volunteer firefighters. There are plenty of people out there who help as well. So we also need to think about that aspect. Not all the resources should go to the air component. Unfortunately, the needs are increasing, forest fires are increasing, heat waves are getting worse and worse. So we need both aerial and ground resources that are up to these new demands, and then we also need to learn to get used to giving up some comforts, to cut down trees when necessary, and so on. You know the full story, and I recommend the links on these topics. They're quite interesting. Prevention remains the top priority. But in any case, we're not just sitting around, things are moving forward. My friends in security, I'm always in touch with them, and they really have high hopes for the different projects I've mentioned. So right now, we're working hard to hold on until they arrive. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you very soon.